It's really a privilege to be able to introduce the panelists this morning. I'm going to be very short on their biographical details because you can certainly look them up in the program, but they're really quite distinguished, and we're really blessed to have Archbishop Chomali, who's a friend of our community in Chile, has been an amazingly effective pastor, is currently chancellor of one of the major Catholic universities in Chile, and he is going to give a talk on poverty, education, and social promotion, our experience. Following Archbishop Chomali will be my great friend and colleague, Nicole Garnett, who is causing quite a stir with her most recent book, Lost Classroom, Lost Community. She will give a talk on America's irreplaceable Catholic schools. And finally, Shavar Jeffries, who's a great friend from Seton Hall University previously and currently Newark, New Jersey, will give a talk on improving life outcomes for the poor through school choice and deregulated education. Shavar is one of the warriors of school choice across the United States. So let's give our panelists a welcome. So I'm going to be quite Stalinist in my moderation this morning. I know that's an oxymoron, so that we can have plenty of time for discussion. Archbishop Chomali.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity you give to me to talk about our experience of poverty, education, and social promotion. I say to Professor Neil that I need a translator. And he said to me, no, you don't need a translator because you speak a very good English. So, if you understand my presentation, he was right. If you don't understand my presentation, I was right, okay? So we'll try to see what happens. Chile is a country who have 17 million of persons at the moment, and he grows a lot. The economic development was impressive in all this year. In the 1985, it was $1,500 per person, and now the last year 15,000, and now more or less we are 20,000 per capita in dollars. This is very impressive, and Chile is very famous in that sense. But also, we are less poor than the 90. In the 90 was more or less 38% of our citizens in the poverty line, and now we are 15%. But 15% means that 2,006,000 people, Chileans, live in poverty. In the cities, they live with $110 per month, and in the rural place, $75 per month. You understand? Yeah, okay, so he was right. Okay. Chile is a country whose birth rate in Chile is down. In the 60s, there was 5 childs per fertility rate per woman in fertility time, and now it's 1.82. I was born, all my brothers and sisters in the 1960s, and we are 5. And now I see in my own family, my brothers, they have only 2. But in that time, we was 5, and in my house was one television. Now people has only 1 brother by 5 television at home. This is the difference. Huh? I see you understand very well. I'm happy on that. And the birth rate in Chile is increasing those people that don't have a father in his house, his own father. the professor Nobel of Economy, he said that in the United States is 40%, in Chile 68%. That means that when I was young, I was one mother, one father, and 5 brothers and 1 television. Now Chilean people have one mother who works all day long, one father who see sometimes, and 1 brother and sister. So the change is very big. And also, people are more elder. I mean, in the 1920, the age, expectative of age was 31 years old. Now is 87 years old. In that sense, the change is so big that my father said to me, you have to look for you have to study a career and to think in your job, okay? But now, my brothers say to their sons, you have to choose a good career, you have to find a good job, and you have to think what you will do 30 years in retire. 30 years is a lot of time, no? Proportion of people aged 60 or older in a few years in Chile will be 20%. And also in the 2025, the number of people between 0 and 15 years old will be the same of people of 60 or more. So the change will be very big. And what I'm trying to do now is that in Chile we have to think a very good immigrant policy. We don't have a good immigrant policy, and many people from our country, other country, comes to Chile to work because older are more rich, but they are very alone. In Chile, we have 4 million people between 15 and 28 years old, and the quantity of women and men are more or less the same. And this is a very, very important thing in Chile. In the 83, only in the higher university, 1,072,000 people. And now we have more or less 1 million. This is a very big change. And when I get into the university, the Catholic University in Chile, the 75, I studied civil engineering before go to the seminary, we was only 100,000 people in the university. It was very elitist, the university, not anymore, and this is a very important change. But anyway, and the evaluation of graduate enrollment also. You can see the difference. Now we have 30,000 students in graduate enrollment, and the private groups make a very good contribution. This is University of the States and Catholic University, and this is private. You can see that 30 years ago was 2,000 in private and 100,000 in States and Catholic University, but now there are more in private. These have problems, but it's not what I want to talk now. This is, for me, one of the most serious problems we have, is that everybody wants to study careers who makes money. For example, administration, science, everything. But if you see here, if you see humanities, we have only 10,000. So is a country more rich, with a lot of technologies, but it's very hard to find somebody who wants to study philosophy, theology, arts, music, and everything. So technocratic and practice country, but men are much more than science. Art is very important in our life. Here, this is quintile, how you say? Quintile. You see that those more poor, many of them doesn't finish school, and the rich one, almost all of them finish. You know, here you can see a difference between people 19 and 28. The quintile more poor, most of them don't finish the school and high school. So there is a relationship between the money you have and the studies you can get. In that sense, in Chile, we have 16.4% of young students in Chile do not study, work, or look for work. That is 6,070 young adults that doesn't work and doesn't study. And this is very, very sad. In my diocese, we are 120,000 young people between 18 and 28 that they don't study, and those who are of the quintile more higher, all of them, they are working, studying, and only 6% are inactive. In this place is almost 16.4%. So now we can see that the country grows, but the gap between the poor and rich are more big, more higher. And that means, and this is another problem, between those who are inactive young adults, women are 75%. So this is a main problem. That's why I feel very proud because in my university, we have more women than men who study. And you can see that that means that these same people who don't work and study, they are also the poorest. And that's why the Catholic Church is very engaged to give the best education to the poor. And I really feel very proud of this, and that's what I want to show in the next slide. In the Catholic University of La Santísima Concepción, we have 11 students, undergrad 7,000, graduate 686, and technical, 2 or more and 4 years program, 3,507 students. And we have a lot of places where study around all the dioceses. The average wage for people from the risk quintile who have completed secondary education is 3 times that other counterpart in the poorest quintile. 83% of richest quintile has access to higher education, while only 18% of the poorest quintiles does. The richest quintile perform on average 40% better than the poorest quintile on the university admission exam PSU. 87.5% of students in the richest quintile complete secondary education, while 60% on the poorest quintile does. 88% of children in the richest quintile are likely to attend preschool, while in the poorest quintile this figure drops to 67%. In that sense, our students, 85% of our students are from Bio region, 52% complete their secondary education in municipal schools, and I have to say very responsible, they're very bad. 43% complete their secondary education in subsidized private school, private and state school, and 4.5% complete their secondary education in private school. Here you pay zero, and in private school you can pay until $1,500 a month. This is the difference. So a poor is educated with $80 a month is the money who gives the state, and the rich they can be educated with $1,500. So the difference is very, very big. And 54% of our students are women. And not only they're women, but they have much best grades than men's. No, it's true. We are 5, 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and my 2 sisters are much more intelligent than we are. So that's the. Now, this is very important. In our university, the enrollment last year the quintiles, first, second, and third, is 68% of our students. I feel very proud of that. And why? Those people, if you help them in the university, they will have a very important change in his life. I think that the market can distribute the Mercedes-Benz or Porsche as he wants. But God distributes the talents and the capacity for everybody, all the people the same. So if you help them, you can change their life absolutely, and that's what I would like to show in this one. Our student, 67% is first generation, and this is very important, and 65% of our graduates are from the third quintile, you know? So those people are the first generation in his family educated in the university. And this is the most important things that I want to show. Here we do this study. We have here the categorization about the parents who stay at home, 12, number 12, and those who are managers, senior administrator, and entrepreneur, industrial business, men, everything. And now we will show you this study. This is the last slide. We took 583 students regarding his mother, and the same number regarding his father, 552 regarding his father, and 593 regarding his mother. And we say, what happened with them? And this is very important. With his father, 80 remain in the same status of his father. So, if his father was, for example, a technical, he was a technical. But most of them increase one, the least. You understand? I mean, if he was a small industry, now he will be an office worker. If he was a police, now a professional with 5 or more years of study. So you can see how changed. And only a few are less than his father. But regarding his mother, you can see that only 50 stay as his mother. But most of them, 50% of them, change 10 places in relation of his mother. That means that if his or her mother stay at home, the 50% of those who goes to our university and they finish his study will be professional with 5 or more years of studies. And this means that if his mother or father win in his work 1, they win 5 or 6 more money. And if they get married, they will be not poor anymore. So what we have to do is to help them to survive in the university and many times with a lot of difficulty. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this Wednesday, the Archdiocese of Chicago announced that it was going to close or consolidate about a dozen schools. And in response to this announcement, the Chicago Sun-Times ran this op-ed expressing this very simple sentiment, which I'm sure resonates with Cardinal George. He had to make the decision to close schools that had educated the minds and hearts of young people in his archdiocese for generations. Some of these schools had been open over 100 years. I'm sure, and it resonates with me. But I don't actually think this sentiment's all that widespread, except perhaps as a convenient excuse for kicking the church when it's down. We've closed over 2,000 Catholic schools in the United States in the last 2 decades, and unless something changes fairly dramatically, we'll probably close as many or more in the next 2. We may run out of schools to close. The secular world essentially ignores the Catholic school crisis, and when confronted with it, sort of shrugs and says, oh, well, why do we need them anymore? We have charter schools. And I think even in the church, there's sort of a nagging suspicion that the game may be up. As Cardinal Dolan has said, it seems as if sometimes we're seized with a hospice mentality, as if the best thing we can do for our schools is to keep them as comfortable as possible while they slowly die. Some in the church, maybe some in this room, or maybe not in this room, in the other room, probably think that the church doesn't need schools. We would be better off without them. They're expensive, they're headaches, they're hard to run. And at a conference on poverty, maybe it's a reasonable question to ask, why don't we just take all the inordinate resources that we are investing in educating a very, very small subset of Catholic kids in the United States and do something else with it, like give it to the poor? So I actually would like to offer 3 reasons why Catholic schools matter in the United States and elsewhere, but in the United States in particular, and then to maybe offer a couple of thoughts about how we might help them not just survive, but thrive. So to do that, I want to ask a simple question. So what would we lose if we lost our Catholic schools, if we ran out of schools to close? The first thing that is we would suffer a loss of educational pluralism. Most of you may probably know this, but Catholic schools were formed in the 19th century in a spirit of protest. So immigrants were arriving in large numbers in the United States around the time that the fledgling public school system was getting up and running. Public schools were pervasively Protestant and completely intolerant of religious pluralism. Catholic kids were forced to engage in Protestant religious devotions and beaten senseless if they objected. When the Archbishop, or maybe it was the Bishop of Philadelphia, modestly suggested that perhaps Catholic kids could read the Catholic Bible instead of the King James Bible, cartoons like this one appear in the mainstream press. This was called "The Shadow in Our Schools" is the caption. Philadelphia burned for several weeks in the Philadelphia Bible riots. So at the time, the church was resolved to do this on their own, as Archbishop John Hughes, who's up there, the first Archbishop of New York, said. They called him Dagger John Hughes, and he liked it. So Dagger John, I have this picture in my son's room, John Joseph Garnett, John Joseph Hughes. Anyway, Dagger John Hughes said that the system, it was totally unjust but unavoidable. A poor, poverty-stricken immigrant church set about on its own building the largest private school system in the world. And over the last century and a half, that school system has provided a authentically religious, academically excellent education, and something that is increasingly a countercultural witness in our secularizing world. I'm a Catholic convert, I'm a public school kid. I didn't really get Catholic schools until I became a Catholic school parent, but I really have come to understand that they are something they're more than just schools. They're places where the joy of vocation is modeled every day, and where children are formed, not just educated, and where they have a lived experience that integrates faith and reason. And our culture, which sees religion as a weird sideshow, needs that countercultural witness of Catholic schools. The second thing we'd lose is the Catholic school advantage. Decades of social science research have found that Catholic schools excel at educating disadvantaged kids, especially the poor minority kids that our society all too often condemns as simply uneducable. Here's just one example. Latino boys are 40% more likely to graduate from high school and 2.5 times more likely, 250% more likely to graduate from college if they attend a Catholic school. Catholic schools in the United States are arguably the most effective anti-poverty intervention that we have ever conceived. They prove that demographics is not destiny. They form our leaders. Minority leaders like, here's Sonia Sotomayor talking to kids at her school in the Bronx right before it closed. And so when Catholic schools close, we lose schools that generation after generation have represented a path to a better future for poor children, like the Archbishop just talked about with his university. Finally, when we lose Catholic schools, When we lose Catholic schools, we lose what, I'm going to go back, that's in a second. We lose what social scientists call incubators of social capital. Social capital is the glue that holds us together as a society, that enables neighborhoods to overcome things like poverty and crime and disorder. In my own research that Father Tim Scully mentioned, my colleague Peg Brennig and I measured the effects of Catholic school closures on urban neighborhoods in Chicago and Philadelphia, and we find that when Catholic schools close, these neighborhoods become more dangerous, more disorderly, and less socially cohesive. Just one example, in Chicago, we found between 1999 and 2005, controlling for demographics, that a police beat with an open Catholic school had about 30% on average less crime than a police beat that had lost a Catholic school. And public and charter schools don't seem to do the same work. They sometimes make things worse. We don't know for certain why Catholic schools are such good citizens, but we know that they are, and we know that neighborhoods that struggle with disorder and poverty and crime need desperately stabilizing community institutions like Catholic schools. So, of course, this is good as far as it goes, but I believe the problems of Catholic schools are real. We can't just prop them up. We really have to transform them, or their future is actually not bright. But we have to believe that we can transform our schools for the next generation of kids. I certainly do. I hope you do too. So I'm not an expert on school transformation, but I've learned a lot from listening to Tim Scully and others who know a lot more than me, superintendents, teachers, bishops, and archbishops, and I want to just offer a couple lessons about how we might think about transforming our schools so that they can not just survive, but thrive. The first is that leadership matters. It's critical. Everyone knows that if a school has a strong principal and a committed, supportive pastor, it can not only survive, but it will thrive. Every story about a school that is brought back from the edge of the abyss begins with a strong and committed leader, including my own children's school. This is not a complicated formula. Principal plus pastor equals success. But implementing that formula is complicated, right? It's not just a programmatic challenge, although we could do more to help form leaders and Notre Dame is doing a lot, I'm very proud to say, to help form leaders for the unique challenges of running Catholic schools. This is a vocational challenge, and it can only be met with prayer and a dedicated effort to instill a sense of vocation in young people, but I will say that Catholic schools are a good place for both of those inputs. The second lesson is that we must know who we are. Every Catholic school needs to have a strong sense of identity and mission, and that identity and mission should inform every aspect of the school day. Catholic schools have thrived for a century and a half because of their distinctiveness, and I don't see any reason to abandon that distinctiveness in favor of a conformity to societal expectations that are both depressed and depressing. We can do better. We believe that every child is formed in the image and likeness of God, and that everything that happens in a Catholic school should be infused with that reality. Again, this is not a complicated formula. At Notre Dame's ACE Academies in Tucson and Tampa, every child has a t-shirt that summarizes it in 4 words: our goals, college, heaven. The third lesson is that we must recruit Latinos. Latinos are now 35% of practicing Catholics in the United States and 67% of practicing Catholics under the age of 35. Yet only 3% of Latino children in the United States attend a Catholic school. Our schools were founded to educate immigrant children, and the need for a faith-filled, excellent education among immigrants to the United States has never been more acute. The simple reality is that if we can expand the gift of Catholic schools to more Latino families, we will secure a hopeful future for children, for our schools, for our church, and for our nation. The fourth lesson is that Shavar is right. He's going to tell you about parental choice. Sound and just education policy empowers parents, the first and best teachers, to choose schools, including faith-based schools, for their children. And an education policy that does not permit faith-based schools to participate fully in the critical task of educating our nation's young people is neither sound nor just. So Catholics are wimps. We gotta be more like Dagger John. Who fought for school choice for his whole life, instigating various riots along the way. He believed in the just that this was a just cause. We have to believe it's a just cause. We got to get over our anxieties about timidity and stop trying to be polite. Father Andrew Greeley once quipped that the first voucher would arrive the day the last Catholic school closed. We can't let that be true. We actually are winning education reform battles in many states, and we have to win them everywhere. We must demand a place at the education reform table because we have earned it. Okay, finally, we must overcome our doubts about the future of Catholic schools, overcome our hospice mentality, and we must have faith in the transforming power of God and combine our faith with our own initiative. We must heed St. Teresa of Avila's admonition that Christ has no hands now but ours. I'll just close with a personal story. The experience of being a Catholic school parent is one of the great gifts of my life. It has helped me live my faith more fully. It is helping me form my children as I wish them to be formed in their own faith. And I thank God for St. Joe Grade School every day. But my gratitude is particularly deep because this beautiful place almost ceased to exist not that long ago. Like many urban Catholic schools, St. Joe was struggling academically and financially, and the writing seemed to be on the wall. Sooner rather than later, the school was going to close. But thanks to the Holy Spirit and a principal and a pastor determined not to give in to the inevitable, St. Joe not only survived but thrived. The principal, there's the principal, Mrs. Wee Wee, and if you want to know, she's still there, 25 years into her, after she saves the school. If you want to know how awesome Mrs. Wee Wee is, the kids don't even giggle when they say Mrs. Wee Wee. They say it sort of in a hushed awe tone. So 25 years ago, St. Joe Grade School had about 175 kids. It was ready to close. Today, it has 460 kids, the highest test scores in the diocese, the highest enrollment since Vatican II, and a waiting list for parishioners. If you are a new parent, like one of my colleagues was anxious as a parishioner, I don't know if my kid's going to get in. It's a miracle. And it was named last year a National Blue Ribbon School. And Mrs. Wee Wee got on the intercom to announce to the kids that St. Joe had been named a National Blue Ribbon School. My youngest, Libby, no, she's not my youngest, my third youngest. I have a baby, so sometimes we forget him. John Joseph. He's the best, but Libby still is my baby too. Anyway, so Libby comes home and she's all upset and she says, Mommy, Mrs. Wee Wee was crying. And she didn't understand this National Blue Ribbon School thing. She thought that Mrs. Wee was crying because St. Joe was going to close, which actually was indicated to me that Libby listens to me more than I ever thought she did. And I told her, no, Libby, you have to understand, Mrs. Wee Wee wasn't crying because the school was going to close. Mrs. Wee Wee was crying because it didn't. So I like to go to school masses. There's the bishop at our school mass. The liturgies often leave something to be desired, but they're incredibly beautiful because I look out at those 460 kids and I think to myself, this is a miracle. And then I start to cry. But anyway, then my eyes fill with tears and I resolve once again to do everything I can to help God save more Catholic schools like St. Joe. So I think this is a great story, a model for all of us in the church today. We must be more like Catholics in the 19th century who built the largest private school system in the world in the face of crushing poverty and pervasive discrimination. And like Mrs. Wee Wee and Father Tim's Holy Cross brother, Father Tony, who saved St. Joe Grade School when all was lost. They overcame their doubts, rolled up their sleeves, and trusted in the Lord to transform their human initiative into the stuff of miracles. We can and we must do the same. Thanks.
Reverend Scully said, whatever I say, I have the coolest socks in the room. So I don't know if that.
Look at those socks. They're amazing.
Anyway, I'm very, very honored to be here and very excited to be here with my good friend Carter Sneed, who I love very much and known for 16 years. And I thought I would talk about a personal story and then get into some of the more systemic issues that we could talk about. I grew up in the South Ward of Newark, which is not a neighborhood that's not aligned with the greatness of young people. It's a neighborhood, unfortunately, at the time when I was growing up, where we had too much crime, too much poverty. But the children were amazing. They were created by God to do amazing things, and the environment wasn't aligned with the greatness of our kids. And I was in 8th grade. I was at the Boys and Girls Club, where my grandmother, who was raising me at the time, she would put me at the Boys and Girls Club. She was a corrections officer in our county jail. She was working late nights, and so after school, she wanted me to go to Boys and Girls Club so I wouldn't be on the streets getting into trouble. And one day I was there playing basketball, and one of the counselors came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I have some paperwork for you to fill out." And I didn't know what this paperwork was about, but I filled it out because I trusted them, and they were good to me. And I filled it out, and a few weeks later, they told me, "We're giving you a scholarship to go to a place called Seton Hall Preparatory School, which is a college prep Catholic school in West Orange, New Jersey." And I had never heard of Seton Hall Preparatory School. I didn't know what that was. And I went to the orientation, and they gave me a blazer with an insignia on it. And they gave me these tan khaki pants that I had to wear. And at 13 years old in the South Ward of Newark, that really wasn't hot, that really wasn't cool, in my neighborhood. And my grandmother said, "You're gonna have to go to, Bergen Street in Lehigh, which is a couple blocks away from my house. You gotta go get on one of our public buses, the 39, and then go downtown and get on another bus, and then go up to West Orange. And after being on the bus for an hour and 40 minutes, you're gonna walk up the hill, you're gonna wear those tan khaki slacks and this blazer, and you're gonna go do what they tell you to do." And when I walked into those doors, I started hearing about how God had created us to do amazing things. And I started hearing about, because we believe God has created you to do amazing things, we're gonna push you to do amazing things. And we're not going to settle for less. We're not gonna have excuses. We believe each and every child who comes through this door is a genius, has limitless possibility and potential, and it's our job to cultivate that in you. And so 4 years later of working relentlessly, of having conversation with my English professor about whether or not we're gonna use a semicolon or an M- or a colon, when we wanna emphasize what comes after the semicolon, and conversation about, you got a 98 on that paper, but what happened to the other 2 points? And this is unacceptable. How dare you only get a 98? And my baseball coach was the same way. I was a pitcher, and if my elbow was not exactly perpendicular to my shoulder, he would stop practice and proceed to relentlessly berate me and the rest of our teammates. How dare you, how can it be that your elbow's at 44 degrees and not 45? In that environment, I began to flourish. And I did well. I got scholarships to go to college and law school and beyond. But at the same time, while I was at Seton Hall Prep, in my neighborhood, my friends that I had grown up with and who didn't get somebody to tap them on the shoulder, and so didn't have this scholarship opportunity fall into their lap, they went into neighborhood public schools that were not aligned with their greatness, where for most of our public schools at that time, barely 1 in 2 of our kids made it out of high school. And it's really worse than that, because the 1 in 2 who made it out of high school, who obtained a diploma, only half of those who obtained a diploma could pass the high school exit exam, which meant they weren't college ready. And we had similar talents, similar dreams about the things we wanted to do with our lives, but one by one, the older they got, the more they began to talk about what they could not do and what wasn't possible, and that college wasn't possible for them. And I was in an environment where college was the minimum, right? I was being taught and trained that college really is nothing. That's the minimum, right? If you're here to do great things, graduating from college really isn't all that impressive if we think you've been created by God to change the world. But slowly and incrementally, I realized that those with whom I had grown up with and who had the same dreams and same possibilities weren't being prepared to fulfill all of what God had created them to do. And so from that point forward, I said, I'm going to dedicate my life to doing something about that. Because I don't believe God blessed me with somebody to tap me on the shoulder at 13 years old and not look back. And so for the last 15 years now, I've been very active in this space of school choice. In 2001, a group of us founded a charter school back in Notre. And we founded the school and created the school because we believed that if we had the autonomy to act in ways that we knew would work, where we could hire great school leaders and great teachers who believe in these kids and push them to fulfill their greatness, that we could change some of these numbers and some of these outcomes. And as I studied these issues more, and as I studied more what was happening in our traditional public schools, it became very clear to me that one of the fundamental problems that we have in our traditional public schools in the United States is that they're very uniform, and they're very lockstep, and they're heavily regulated. So we have federal laws that I think are well-intentioned, but oftentimes the way in which they apply at the local level can become very micromanaging. In 1983, when we had the Nation at Risk report that spoke about the extent to which the United States was falling behind on international benchmarks and the extent to which the educational deficits between the United States and other industrialized nations was growing, that it was affecting the productivity and the competitive position of the country. That kind of spawned the standards and accountability movement, where state after state increased standards for what it took for students to graduate from high schools, but incrementally as well, state regulatory departments began to impose rules, and then consultants began to create out-of-the-box curricular and pedagogical methods, which increasingly began to micromanage what was happening in our classrooms. We had programs like Success for All, which literally on a minute-by-minute basis specified the way in which teachers ought to instruct and the methods they ought to use. And then standardized tests were aligned with those pedagogical and curricular practices so that you can measure whether or not students were receiving what the kind of paint-by-numbers approach to education indicated the kids ought to receive. Education became an area of intense interest for politicians because obviously parents were very concerned about what was happening to their children. And so politicians felt that they needed to act. And so we've seen dramatic increases in statutory and regulatory activity over the last 20 to 25 years, spawned by the standards and accountability movement. You have politicians at every level, at the federal level, the state, and the local level, who want to act and show to their constituents that they're acting when it comes to education matters. And so you get a kind of alphabet soup of statutes and regulations, most of which are designed to take away autonomy from the classroom. We have a heavy unionized set of public schools where we have highly micromanaging collective bargaining agreements, which don't simply kind of specify compensation and benefits, but also speak to what happens in the classroom, speak to how principals can hire teachers, speak to how superintendents can hire principals, speak to the number of hours principals are required to work, speak to the number of hours teachers are required to work, speak to what criteria a teacher can be evaluated upon, speak to what criteria a principal can be evaluated upon, speak to who can evaluate a teacher, when they can do it, what they can look at, what notices must be provided before a supervisor can go into the classroom, speak to what criteria an assistant superintendent can use to evaluate a principal, when the assistant superintendent can evaluate the principal, what they must look at, what notices must be provided. At the same time, all this was happening on the regulatory and statutory front. We had the civil rights movement, because it used to be the case in the early part of the 20th century that women and people of color who were locked out of certain private sector opportunities found opportunities in education. So you had many people who are now lawyers and doctors and engineers were teachers and were school leaders. But as gender discrimination softened, but obviously we still have a lot of work to do there, and as racial discrimination softened, but still there's a lot of work to do there, that opened up other opportunities so that you had a lot of that talent that was in education going into other industries. At the same time, the overregulation, the way in which public education has been overregulated has frankly made it harder to attract the very best people into education. So the pay isn't what it could be because there's not a lot of autonomy. And when you have overregulation, that obviously is going to increase the costs and is going to capture money, so there's less money to actually give into personnel. So all of this has combined into a system of public schools that is very monopolistic, is very expensive, is very bureaucratic, is very slow, is very inefficient, at the same time that we demand more of our public schools than we ever did before. So for most of the 20th century, a high school diploma had a whole lot more currency in the labor market than it does right now. And we know today that a college degree is the absolute minimum for what our young people must shoot for. But our public schools, I believe, are woefully prepared and institutionally incompetent, frankly, in terms of their design to achieve these goals that we now foist upon them. And it's even worse for poor people and people of color, because those, frankly, with money, they tend to opt out of this system, either through private education or in suburban public schools that are, frankly, less infected by some of these ills of regulation that I've talked about. So what do we do about it? What do I think we ought to do about it? I think we have to introduce choice and competition so that we can bring innovation and more autonomy to our classroom and over time attract more talented people in education. In our public schools in the United States, those that disproportionately educate children of color and poor people, we have the bottom 10% of college graduates in our classroom. You look at the best performing public school systems throughout the world, Sweden, Finland, Singapore, you see the top 10% of college graduates in the classroom. We have to begin to transform our systems in order to do that. So I believe deeply that choice and competition is a critical mechanism by which we begin to deregulate our public schools. I also found that I was the president of our school board in the city of Newark, so I was the president of our traditional school system, and I was also the founder of this charter school system I talked about, which is now the largest charter school system in the state of New Jersey. And I give you one anecdote that talks about the way in which the regulation, I believe, gets in the way of common sense approaches of doing the right things for our children. When I was the president of our school board, I led an approach where we had excess space in our public schools, and I said we should be able to rent that space at cost to public charter schools. Public charter schools were growing. They didn't have school buildings. Because many parents were beginning to pull their kids out of our traditional schools, we had space in our traditional schools. We could leave that space empty, and it would cost the traditional public school system money, which would end up in layoffs, or we could rent that space at cost, so I wasn't saying we should make a profit, which some felt was controversial, to public charter schools that needed space. So we did that. Very controversial, but we did it. When the public charter school came in, they realized the building was hot and said, we don't want our kids to be hot when we're trying to educate them. So the school leader for that school went out to Home Depot and they bought a bunch of window air conditioning units and they plugged them into the wall and put them in the window and they turned them on. And the kids were cooler. On the first two floors, which were where the traditional public schools were, the parents began to complain that there was inequality because the kids upstairs in the charter school had air conditioning and the kids in the traditional school system didn't. I said, well, naturally, we should put window units in for the traditional public school kids as well, and that should have happened a long time ago. 7 months later, we're able to get some air conditioning units in the window, but when we first tried to do it, the union that represented the custodial workers who were supposed to put the air-conditioned units in, they didn't have to come during the summer, because this was in July and August. They didn't have to come until the end of August, and they said they weren't going to show up. Then when the school year started and they were going to put them in the window, there were issues about the plug was too close to another window, so they had to move the plug. So then we had to have requisition orders to go out to have somebody move the plug. That took a few months later, and then by the time that got resolved and we were able to put the window units in the window, it was now wintertime and we didn't need to turn them on anyway. And that's just one example of how heavily bureaucratic, how heavily regulated, we can't move, we can't do common sense things, and it hurts our kids. It's similar in terms of what happens in teaching and instruction. Our teachers are heavily regulated, particularly in our big city urban school systems, heavily regulated by consultant-based curricula that literally micromanage on a set of minutes, 5 to 6 minute unit basis, unit by unit, what teachers ought to do, when they ought to do it, what methods they ought to use, what pedagogical tools they ought to use, and they can't respond to the individualized needs of kids. And this, and the same sort of regulation we see at the classroom level, we see at the personnel level. When you hire, who you can hire, what credentials you use, what credentials you can't use and evaluate, eats out the ability of great school leaders to be innovative, to be entrepreneurial, and to respond to the specific needs of what their kids need. So I believe choice is critical, and I believe a lot of these elements that I've talked about are a reflection of the way in which too many of our schools are very monopolistic. There is not choice. There is not competition. And when you don't have choice, you don't have competition, this is what you tend to get. You tend to get high inefficiency that's very expensive. So in many of our big city schools, unlike the situation that was discussed in terms of Chile, we spend a lot of money. So we spend about $21,000 per kid on public education in the city of Newark. We spend $1 billion to educate 37,000 kids, and we're highly inefficient. And the results are not what they ought to be. And so, so I believe deeply through competition, through vouchers, where we allow great Catholic schools to participate, through the growth of effective public charter schools, through a proliferation of a different of a diversity of schools. Not all kids learn the same. Kids learn in different ways, and we're not going to be able to do any of that as I take my seat, as I got the signal, if we don't do what we talk about. You have to organize. You have to fight. I just ran for the mayor of the city of Newark. We came very close. We had about 47% of the vote. Education reform was the #1 issue in our election, and because I believe in school choice, and I respect the union. They fight for what they believe in, and they fight hard. And their interests are not aligned with school choice and these issues that we're talking about. Those of us who believe in these issues, we have to fight just as hard. And if we don't, we're going to continue to lose these fights, and our kids aren't going to get what they deserve. So thank you.
Wanted to reserve quite a bit of time for discussion, so I'm going to take advantage of being the chair and just ask the first question, and then I invite others to do so as well. So Carter, I don't know if you had this in mind, but if you look at the advanced industrial democracies and middle-income democracies at the 30,000-foot level, it's really kind of interesting the way you position this, because you have literally the country in the world that has the most choice, if you will, and some have criticized that model, but nonetheless, Chile has actually the most parental choice, the most flexibility for parents to choose the kind of school they want their child to attend, and the United States actually has the least in all advanced industrial democracies' choice. So maybe we'll start there. Let me ask our wonderful Chilean colleague and friend, Archbishop Chomali, who may have a different opinion than we about choice and the effects of choice on poverty, and then maybe a quick rejoinder from Nicole and Shavar if they wish, and then I'll open it up. Archbishop.
In Chile, there are 3 important things for people.
Can people hear?
No, now yes, okay. In Chile, now yes, okay. No, not yet.
You might have to just shout.
Hello,
Oh, these aren't on?
now.
Are those things on, those little guys? Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's necessary.
And Chile, you were saying?
Thank you. In Chile, there are 3 very important things for people. The first most important thing is that the child who will born is healthy. I just want my child is healthy. The second thing is, in Chile, people say, I want that my son will be more than myself. And the third, I want my own houses. If somebody has his kids healthy, they have the kids who go to the university or are more than him, and the house, they feel very comfortable in their life. In Chile, there is the opportunity to go to state schools, but everybody knows, because we can study that those people who goes to public schools, they don't arrive to the university. I mean, it's a not good education. The other possibility is that the normal people, also church, can have schools, and the state pay for that, for each child, and the fathers, they can give a difference in money. So it's financially the state and the fathers, okay? And the third possibility is the private school, okay? The problem is that the rich people goes to private school, they get the best places in the university, and they continue with this cycle. And the poor people, they go to very low quality school. Also, the private with the covenant with the state, many of them are very not good, and they cannot reach the university. So the problem is not that we have a lot of possibility to choose how Father Scully say, because it's true. But the problem is that yet in Chile, you get the education in direct relationship of the money that you have. And this is very, very, very sad. So we have to look how to help people who have a lot of intelligence that can have a better education. I am sure, absolutely sure, that in Chile and in all South America, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, we are losing a lot of Einstein. We are losing a lot of Beethoven. We are losing a lot of intellectuals because they have his capacity, but in the school they don't get up all this capacity, but they shut the capacity because the education is not right. So until yet, there is a direct relationship between the money of the father and the education of the son. And this is, I feel, is a shame.
Thank you. I think these may be voice activated now, are they?
Hello? Yeah. So, wait,
They're
just,
voice activated, so you have to get close.
oh, sorry. I think that, as Father Scully mentions, the United States, there's been a century and a half long battle, starting with Dagger John Hughes, for parental choice. I actually am hopeful about their trajectory. We have 20 states in the District of Columbia have some kind of parental choice that includes private schools. 43 states have charter schools. I hope that we're moving toward a world which I would call sector agnostic world. That is, it doesn't matter where the seats are, what sector they're in, private, charter, or public. We just need as many good seats as possible for these kids that they could really fulfill their God-given potential. But I think that we can't get to that world unless we allow private schools as well as charter schools to fully participate in the education of kids. And so in Shavar's Newark, there's actually a lot of choice because he starts charter schools, but there are Catholic schools that are closing and other schools that really deserve to be a part of the education reform equation. So I think that we're getting there, but we're not getting there fast enough. We need choice in Newark, and we need choice in Illinois. We need it everywhere. The other thing I will say, it goes to what Archbishop just said, is that one of the things we've learned working at Notre Dame with the church on issues of parental choice is that it's not just getting a program passed. Parental choice is really hard work. So when we have vouchers in Indiana, a lot of schools, good schools, took in too many kids too fast. They weren't ready for these kids. The kids were behind. So we really have to take advantage of the opportunities when they become available to make our schools stronger and better than they were before. We can't just see all of the problems of private schools as money problems, because money is a problem, but it's also hard work to educate kids. And so in order for the parental choice movement, I believe, in the United States to succeed, it has to be, these programs that we have to be successful, and we have to see a growth in the number of high-quality seats across all sectors.
No, I agree with that fully. Choice is growing, but in many of these states, these are relatively small programs. And you may be able to get it through the political process to have a pilot program. And I'm just going to speak from the political lens, having just getting my butt kicked for 20 months on school choice, is the need to organize never stops. So even once you get a program passed, those who oppose do not stop. So even in the charter sector, which is obviously distinct from the voucher sector, jurisdictions, folks will advocate for caps. Folks will advocate. So in New Jersey right now, there's a movement that's growing. spawned by those who oppose the choice to require a referendum in the municipality before a new charter school can open or before an existing charter school can expand. We don't even have vouchers at all. So we've tried for 10 years to get vouchers passed and couldn't get it done, couldn't even get a vote through the political process. And then even if you get one through, then there's going to be a lawsuit, right, the next day, initiated by those who are against choice. Then there's going to be requirements that those who are hired in the charter or in the voucher program have to be unionized in the same way as the traditional public schools, have to use the same tests, have to use the same out-of-the-box curriculum. So the organizing is critical, and we've seen in the Democratic Party where, because of frankly, relatively lukewarm support of choice, by by the current administration. There's calls for the Secretary of Education to resign. And so if we don't organize, these schools aren't going to be here. And they're going to continue to close. And so that's really the call I want to make, because this is a critically important conversation with unbelievably smart people. But when we finish these conversations, we got to get to the streets and fight for those who believe in these issues, or the Catholic schools will continue to close. Essex Catholic, which along with Seton Hall Prep, those are the kind of two schools that serve poor people and kids of color in northern New Jersey. Essex Catholic closed several years ago. And so we have to continue to fight on these issues.
Great. You've been very patient. So let's take 4 quick questions that I see are standing, and then we'll let you all respond to those. Please.
Professor Garnett, I know you said that Catholic schools is not just a problem of money, but I do have a money question for you, but kind of with a twist. My brother is an administrator of a struggling Catholic junior high school in an area that's had a high rate of Latino influx in the last 25 years. And of course, Latinos come from a situation, oftentimes from Latin America, where Catholic schools are for the most elite of society. People coming in are not of the elite of society. So some of it is a cultural difference, but even once those things are overcome and they desire to enter into the Catholic schools, they can't. They simply can't because of the money issue. How do we enable Latinos to be able to afford Catholic schools? What are some tips that you could offer in these few minutes?
Thank you. Go ahead. We'll take these 4 questions first.
So my question is directed especially at the last 2 speakers. I enjoyed all 3 of the talks. I had a worry about what seemed like a presupposition at a number of points, which was that college is the best route for all students, that this is like where we should be directing students. And I only have limited anecdotal experience myself. When I was a master's student at Western Michigan University, teaching students there in the philosophy department, teaching undergrads. Also, from some of what I've read, the Chronicle of Higher Education, for example, had a story a few years ago, and it was challenging this kind of college for all movement. And both from my own anecdotal experience, and I think the data bears this out to some extent, there has been too much of a push for all students to go to college, when some of them, it's not the best route for them. And what the Chronicle found, for example, when they interviewed a lot of students, they found that many students were directed towards college by high school counselors, but did not realize the kind of an amount of work that it involved. And what happens to many of these students is they end up dropping out within a couple of years with a lot of debt. And in other countries, from what I understand, it isn't always the same. In Germany, for example, there are a lot more trade schools, and students are often directed towards those kinds of schools instead. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to whether we should be saying we want all of our students to come out of here to go to college, or if there are other routes instead.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if you think that often the underlying problem or attitude that is behind so much of the pushback against voucher programs or charter school programs and so on is a kind of implicit assumption that, at least when it comes to formal schooling, it's the state's job. And the ideal thing would be to have the state do everything if it were possible, as opposed to the view that really it's the parent's job and the state should just kind of see itself as helping, in which case it would be a no-brainer that you'd want to do whatever you could to give parents more agency. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how to change that kind of fundamental underlying attitude about who's the primary educational agent, parents or the state.
And finally, before we'll just take one more, if you don't mind, and then we'll have the panel respond. Then we'll start with you.
Thank you for to all the panelists, and this is also directed to Professor Garnett. Thank you very much for your talk. And I guess so as we're thinking about the role of Catholic schools in helping the underprivileged and the poor, I'm wondering if you might speak to what role, if any, you see the more affluent Catholic schools playing in these roles, because it seems like there's a lot of resources, a lot of energy, in many ways rightly so, but I was just wondering if you might speak to that.
Thank you. Rich questions.
Well, I guess I can start. First of all, as to the question about money, I direct all questions about money to Tim Scully. I will say about Latinos, I do think that money is an issue, but I think that what you identify as cultural problems is probably a bigger issue. Latinos in the United States come mostly from cultures where Catholic schools are for the elite, and they just don't think about it. And in fact, they don't know they're accessible. They don't know that they'd be welcome, and they never really considered it. So what we've done at Notre Dame, we have a program called the Catholic School Advantage Campaign. We have field consultants that work with dioceses to help actually recruit. We set up madrinas programs in the schools so that the parents who are in the schools and happy go out and tell their friends how great the schools are, and these are very successful. So part of it is even financially educating the parents about whether these schools can be made accessible to them. But yeah, money can be a problem, and short of public funding through vouchers or other things, then this may go to the last question about richer parishes. I mean, then Catholics and non-Catholics, philanthropists need to step up and help make these schools accessible to kids who are the future of our church and our country. We're going to lose them. Our church is going to lose them, and our country's going to lose them if we don't give these kids a faithful education. So I think that that's one role for wealthier parishes. Cardinal Dolan just said that the ideal has always been every parish has a school, but it doesn't have to be the school necessarily that's attached to the parish. Wealthier parishes and wealthier people can really help through money for scholarships and other things, and I think that's critical to the whole church to take ownership over its schools and not just say it's just, that's Father's problem. Now, and then I'll just answer, I'm going to let Shavar answer the question about the political impediments to school choice, but on your point about college, of course, not everybody should be in college. There are other paths to success. I think the danger is that we don't want to fall into this trap that the reason these kids are dropping out of college is because college isn't for them. A lot of kids drop out of college because they're not prepared for college. It's sort of what President George W. Bush called the soft bigotry of low expectations. It's real. We need to believe that every child has infinite capacity. Not every child has the same capacity to be a nuclear physicist. I don't have that capacity. But we can't sell kids short because it seems like they're not going to do well in college, because we really have to go to point one where we're giving them the tools that they need to prepare for college. One of the scariest statistics in education is that minority kids tend to lose, even the smartest, the ones who come in at the top, lose like a year of they fall every year behind where they were before. So the kids that come into New York public schools in the 80th percentile, the next year they're in the 70th. And that's not because they're getting dumber. It's because we're not serving them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree fully. In the city of Newark, it's very similar. I mean, these statistics tend to hold up throughout cities throughout the country. We graduate about a little bit over 50% of our kids out of high school, about 57%. Our district is about 90% African-American Latino, about 55% African-American, about 35% Latino. Of the little bit over half, and it's similar to when I was coming out, as I talked about earlier, 1 out of 2, so a quarter of the total pass our exit exam, which is our kind of baseline bench. It's really a 9th grade exam. It's really a baseline benchmark of readiness for any college. But even fewer, even a fraction of that fraction are prepared for college. So for example, 90% of our graduates who go to any college go to our local community college. About 85% of those who go to our community college need 18 months remediation before they can begin obtaining college credits. So some of us have actually, we're seeking to create a legislative change where they don't have to pay. So they're paying money out of their pocket, right, for 18 months on average. It's basically 13th grade to compensate for what they did not get K through 12. Unsurprisingly, most of them, drop out because they're paying money and oftentimes they can't afford it, and they're not even getting college credits. And so now that's not to say that, and then there's other whole set of issues around what college is right for a particular child, because you got to have good matching. We also have horrible guidance in many of our horrible guidance. You have guidance counselors overwhelmed, 200 kids for one guidance counselor in many of our big city schools. So you don't get the matching, which is also a problem. So you have the foundational issue which is related, frankly, to racial stigma, right? I mean, we got to be real about certain things. Blackness was created as a justification for slavery, and the whole premise was these people aren't as beautiful, they're not as smart, they're not as talented, and we still struggle with that. And so in many of our school systems, we have vocational programs starting at 9th grade that say these kids won't make it to college, so let's prepare them for plumbing and mechanical work, and those are noble vocations. But the idea that at 13 years old we've decided that this is what these kids ought to do, I think is problematic. If we put them in a space where they can fulfill their potential, then they choose these occupations. That's one sort of thing. So I think we got to raise the expectations for these kids. We have to make sure that our systems are aligned to enact those expectations, because you have expectation but the systems aren't aligned with them, you're going to obviously get a disconnect. And then we got to have good college matching. Now, the other issue, and I want to speak on in terms of how we think about the role of government vis-a-vis education, I think is a very important one. And in the late 19th century, when we had this common school, effort, which really led to the fact that in most state constitutions there's a right to education, that wasn't always the case. Most of this happened in the 19th century, early 20th century, where states enacted constitution that said every person has a right to a free public education, right? So I think that impulse is very important, but what we got to think about in this country is the public can have a guarantee to a certain kind of service. That doesn't mean the government has to be the entity that delivers the service. So there's generally in this country a right to health care, Medicaid, Medicare, what people now call Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. That doesn't mean the government has to deliver that. So you can get a little Medicare card or Medicaid card that enables somebody to go out into the private marketplace and get health care. Or you can have a right to housing, and you can get your Section 8 voucher. And there's a lot of imperfections in that program, but you can get your voucher, and you can go to a housing development built by the government, where the government hires the landlord and deals with maintenance, or you can have a private sector provider, but the government guarantees payment. So I think we have to think in a broader way about what the government's role ought to be. I really don't think the government is very effective in delivering a lot of services, and I've just seen it, right? But the government should be a guarantor of payment for certain core public goods. I think education should be a public good. I think health should be a public good. I think a healthy environment should be a public good. And I think the government has a role to ensure that happens. But that doesn't mean the government has to be the actual entity to do the day-to-day work to act upon it.
Well, just a quick rejoinder. Nicole invited me, and then we'll get to your question. Nicole invited me to comment on money questions, so I'll take her bait here. School choice is one avenue, but let's just think for a minute. Nicole reminded us that, the 19th century, our ancestors created in this land the largest private school system in the world. With what money? With what money? With damn little money. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at Christian Smith, a colleague of ours in the sociology department here, data, Catholics are just damn cheap. Let's face it, Catholics are cheap. And we don't, now I'm not speaking to everybody in this room, but maybe I am, I don't know, you can tell me, but in general, Catholics are cheap. And if you think about the blood, sweat, and tears that my grandparents, great-grandparents, our ancestors in this country, how they killed themselves to send their children to faith-based schools and how they sacrificed, we're just not willing to do that today. Now, that's the problem, and it's a problem of values. It's the problem of the 5 TV issue that's affecting Chile and the deep secularization that's affecting that country. No country in Latin America is being secularized more rapidly than Chile is. And this country is not far behind it. Pretty soon we're looking at Western Europe. So anyway, You know, my vocation in life is to change that for Catholics. Any Catholic I find, I work as hard as I can to lift them up by their heels and shake them. And that's what I'm going to do. So we've got yourself. And feel free if you want to just approach the microphone. We'll take a few more questions and wrap up.
Okay, my name is Martin Groß. I come from the Catholic University of Germany. So Western Europe, you're right to say that there is
With
something
all due
happening
respect,
there.
with all due respect.
Pardon?
With all due respect.
Okay, I just wanted to say something about the sort of narrative which is in Germany behind very much freedom for Catholic schools. And the narrative is human dignity. That is, parents, people should not be object of the state, and that is part of the concept of dignity in the Constitution. So when you are somebody who needs welfare, you can constitutionally choose who is the provider of the welfare. Catholic Caritas, Protestants, communists, what have you. And they have to be funded by the state in order to guarantee the freedom of choice as part of human dignity. So, and I like this human dignity narrative very much in order to give the reason for the choice. That is the only statement I wanted to make.
Thank you very much. And the final question.
I'm the filmmaker of The Rule, the documentary that's playing here. And so for Shavar, who was in our prior film, full disclosure here, in our city of Newark, you know how successful a school like St. Benedict's Prep is in educating inner city young men. So our job now is to implement this in public schools, et cetera. We're working with Teachers College at Columbia to do so, but I ask you, in a general way, how can we use a model that's so successful for so long and get it to work elsewhere?
I mean, it's a great question, and I don't know if folks saw the film on St. Benedict's Prep in the city of Newark. Amazing institution. Father Ed is a legend. If there's a Mount Rushmore of human beings, his face needs to be etched upon it. But it's actually a great example. What Father Ed couldn't do what he does in a traditional public school in the city of Newark or most of the United States. Father Ed does not play. If you're a teacher and you can't educate well, you're gone. And you're gone before you can blink an eye. If you're a teacher, you don't believe these kids have been created by God to do amazing things, you're gone. He doesn't have a whole lot of rules about what the teachers do in the classroom. He just says, I'm gonna hire the best people I can who have certain values, values around not only who these kids are and what they can do and what they've been created to do, but values of hard work. And they have a certain skill set, but he kind of hires good people, lets them do their thing. And he sets a certain kind of culture and a certain kind of context. But in our traditional public schools, they're heavily regulated. For example, in the state of New Jersey, like most states in the United States, after 3 years on the job, lifetime tenure to your position. And in most states, it's very difficult to remove someone. You're talking about 1.5 years, 2 years of litigation in order to do that. Lockstep pay. Everybody's paid the same no matter what. If you want to fire someone once they have tenure, you can basically forget about it. If you have to lay people off, you can't evaluate performances. The only criteria you can use in most states, United States, is last in, first out. And that's before you get to all the things I talked about earlier in terms of the regulation of curriculum, the regulation of testing, the regulation of pedagogy, the regulation of instructional methods. So Father Ed couldn't be Father Ed in our urban schools. Father Ed would be like most of the principals who are burnt out and tired and frustrated, and who, if they stay in, their resolve is beaten down after a period of time, or they get out and go to another place or set up your own school, set up a charter school, set up a private school where you can actually do your thing. If we don't solve that problem, this country is going to continue to have its competitiveness on international benchmarks to suffer. We're in the middle of the pack right now, and we're trending to the bottom of the pack. And the issues of wealth inequality, income inequality only exacerbate.
So I actually, on that point, I want to just respond to the point about human dignity. I mean, how dignifying is what that school is doing for those children? How dignifying was it, not just for Shavar, but for his grandmother, that the Seton Hall Prep said, we want your child. We want to educate this child. So choice, parental choice is dignifying. And I think we need to remember that poor people in this country are systematically disenfranchised. They're told nobody trusts you to choose what school your kid goes to. And the very act of empowering them to choose is dignifying. Sometimes scholars kind of scratch their head because you'll see these studies of school choice and this test scores are up a little bit, but not very much, but the parents are like ecstatic. And so the eggheads say, we don't understand what's happening. Why do the parents care? And I think that part of it is, it's because they were empowered to choose. And the very fact of empowering parents to choose is dignifying.
I think what's dignifying is to see 3 people give their lives as these 3 people have. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.